Hello, everyone. My name is Giselle Sotelo, and I'm one of the immigration attorneys at the law offices of Carl Shusterman. And I have here Ellen Lee, who is an experienced, very, very experienced immigration practitioner as well. And our topic of discussion for today is preparing for your interview with USCIS. And we're very happy to have you join us today. So first, I wanted to get started with the types of interview that we will be covering. Specifically, these are USCIS interviews, so we won't be covering any consulate interviews. That will be a topic of a separate discussion.
USCIS meaning that these are the local offices that are going to call you for your interview, and obviously they're usually at the places close to your home, because once you file with immigration, you really do not have a choice of where you want to go. They're going to assign you to the immigration office that is closest to where you live, the address that you file at.
Right. So it depends on your jurisdiction and where you live. So the types of interviews that we will be discussing include the I-130 and I-485 application interviews, which are basically adjustment of status based on either a marriage or a U.S. citizen, an immediate relative.
Or a family base. Basically, I-130 is the application that you use when you want to bring a family member, and that's the I-130. And when you can adjust status in the United States, meaning changing it from whatever was before to a permanent resident, this is a very normal, most of the time, always have an interview for this kind of a case.
Right. So, and it also is going to depend on either you're going to concurrently file, in which case you will be scheduled for an interview on the I-130 and the I-485 both, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then if you are a member of a preference category, you will first file the I-130, and then the petitioner will first file the I-130. After that is approved and your priority date becomes current, then you will file the I-485.
Basically, to get a green card, permanent resident nowadays, there has to be an interview. Whether it's going to be in the United States, is what we're talking about, adjustment status, or they're going to be at a embassy or consulate, U.S. embassy or consulate abroad. That's the consular processing that we are not covering today.
That's right. And so other interviews that you can expect to have at USCIS would also be naturalization interviews that will be covered in this topic of discussion. We do have adjustment of status interviews now required for employment-based applications. So let's say your employer is sponsoring you for an immigrant visa or for an adjustment of status application, then you will now be required to appear at an interview to determine your eligibility to get a green card through the employment-based petition. Also, there is now adjustment of status interviews required for people who are in asylum status. And then you also have what's called the I-751 interview to remove the conditions of a conditional residence. A conditional residence would be a 2-year conditional residency as opposed to the 10-year permanent residency card. And that is, you get conditional residence generally when you have been married for under 2 years to the U.S. citizen.
A little explanation on that one, why we are including that in the last, is because the I-751 is a form that you file to remove your conditional status. If you got your green card through marriage, usually you only get a 2-year green card. At the end of the 2 years, you got to file the I-71 to remove that condition to get a permanent status. Usually, when you file it jointly with your spouse,
that's right,
chances are that there is no interview if you document it well. But yes, there are occasions that they do want to see both of you again.
Right. So yes, but we do recommend that you keep all documents during the marriage, right? Sure. Following the grant of your conditional residence, so that way you can maybe avoid being scheduled for an interview.
Correct.
If you are filing jointly again for the 751.
If your marriage is broken up and then you're filing under the waiver, then pretty much you are going to be interviewed. Not all the time, but pretty much.
Right, and to qualify for the waiver, there's various ways, which will be the topic of another discussion. But the most, I guess, the most common way would be when you divorce your spouse.
Correct.
So you would have to request a 751 waiver of the joint filing requirement.
Yeah. The other kind of interview that's also not always the case is when you file a I-130, the application to classify your relative, a standalone one without the adjustment. That's maybe because your spouse is overseas and they're not here, or your family members overseas if you're not here. Sometimes they still call you in for an interview even if your spouse isn't here because they have questions about your marriage. So don't be surprised if you get one of those asking you to come and prove up your marriage, so-called. They say, my spouse is even here. That happens.
Right. And I just want to add that a standalone I-130 is also happens when you are in removal proceedings, let's say, and you're married to a U.S. citizen, and you are in removal proceedings, in which case the judge does not have jurisdiction over an I-130. Only USCIS has jurisdiction over an I-130. So you will have to file the I-130 with USCIS, and they will not be able to adjudicate the 485. That will either go back to the judge, or the judge will have to terminate and then send it back to USCIS.
Yeah, basically that the USCIS will determine whether your marriage is real because you married at last minute, red flag so-called, and therefore they will do what we call a standalone I-130 interview.
Right. So now let's move on to, if you are scheduled for an interview with USCIS, what can you expect at the interview? Ellen, do you have anything that you want to say?
It's very logistically speaking, I would tell you that the first thing you do is you make sure you know where the place is. I don't want you to be running around trying to find that office building last minute and be late, because certainly you have to understand that even though they make you wait, which is most of the time, they're not happy when you are late. Excuse me. There is a security line to go through, so you have to give time for that. And once you are up into the room or your designated room, make sure you turn your appointment letter over to, there's only one window with a clerk. Look for that, and then you turn it over to the clerk. They will make sure that now they know that you are here, and then you basically wait to be called.
Right.
The officer who is going to interview you will be calling you.
Right. So please bring your appointment letter. It's very important in order for you to register. One thing, and to Ellen's point that you arrive on time, that's very important. I know that at one interview I as the attorney arrived 15 minutes late, and it had to be rescheduled, and it was quite embarrassing because the clients had been waiting there for at least an hour. So please arrive on time and look nice. This is important. It's a big day, so dress appropriately. You have to look like you want it, right? Which I'm sure that you do. So that would be another suggestion that I make.
And also, you don't know who you're going to be talking to. It could be an older person of the next generation up, or it could be a younger person of the next generation down. You really don't know. So you dress appropriately and not just think that, this is nothing. I've seen people go to their naturalization interview in flip-flops, and that's just going to turn the officer off, because it's like you don't care.
Right.
Shorts and flip-flops. I know it's hot, but this is how. I do not suggest that.
Yeah, let's avoid that. So once your name is called, the officer will lead you to his office, his or her office, and it's a pretty informal setting. It's a small office. I don't know if you've ever been in a bigger sized office, but they're generally smaller. And it's kind of, the officer will either engage in kind of a one-on-one conversation, or in the case of a married couple, one-on-two conversation, or it might be more like a Q&A. There may be some awkward silent pauses, but really don't feel the need to like jump in and say something if you're not being asked, or you don't have to.
So just understand that the officer will run the show. So let him or her run the show. Some of them, okay, just to start, you need to prove who you are. Right. So you need to take ID documents, and the ID documents are your passports and your driver's license, and maybe your work permit if you already got one. But do understand that everything you are going through, and I think we should cover a little bit of what you should prepare for before you go, and just understand that everything you're going to bring them now are originals, because you have given them either a lot or nothing, but whatever it was you have given them, hopefully are just copies, because if it's not in your file, you're not going to get your original back. So when you bring your originals, you make sure you bring copies as well, because that will really help. Otherwise, they're going to keep your original.
Right.
So once they determine who you are, and they determine that you are that person, then they will put you under oath to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Don't worry if there is something in your application that you need to change, or there was a typo, I put in the wrong address. Everything is not cast in stone until that day of the interview, and then it is cast in stone.
Right, so, and the officer will be going through the contents of your application and will be correcting any misstatements, anything, any errors that you made in the application. So don't worry about submitting a perfect application.
But because, you could have moved, or you had a birth certificate that you didn't have it translated. So you need to bring the translated copies now, otherwise they can't finish your interview. So in talking about, or just discussing a marriage interview, after they determine who you are and they go through the forms, they will ask about your relationship. But prior to that, they will also make sure that you qualify to get your green card through adjustment. Just because you filed a form and they accepted it doesn't mean anything. If you do not prove to them that you can and qualify to get adjustment, you will be denied for the green card through adjustment. So it is really important that before you go to this interview, that you go through every single important factor about your immigration history. And so therefore, when they ask, you go, here's my I-94, here's my visa, here's my passport, whatever it is that you need to show that you qualify. So then, as far as the legitimacy of your relationship, assuming it's a marriage, is secondary from your qualification to be able to get the green card in America, the adjustment of status.
Right. So just to piggyback off of Ellen, what she's saying is, in the case of a marriage, an I-130 is filed, and separately from that, a 485 if it's based on a marriage to a U.S. citizen. The I-130 is to prove the relationship. The officer is just looking that you have entered into a valid relationship, or you are the mother of this child, correct? So at that point, the relationship has been established. Separate from that is the adjustment application, which is, do you now that the relationship has been shown, do you also qualify for the benefit, for the adjustment, or are you inadmissible?
To put it simply, it's a two-step process.
Right.
Because you are here in the United States, they give you a little bit of leeway by combining the first step to the second step to be adjudicated together. If you're not, most people understand this, you apply and you go to the counsel. That consulate for the interview, that's the normal two-step process. So on each application, the I-130 and the I-45, you have to qualify for each one of them.
Exactly, and they're separate.
Yeah. Qualifying for one doesn't mean you qualify for the other, so you need to do that homework to know that. Otherwise, you will go there, they will approve one, deny the other, and you're out the money, because they are not going to give you any money back, even though you told, I'm sorry, it was a mistake.
That's right. And then also, in addition to IDs, taking IDs to prove that you're the person who is applying for the benefit, or petitioning the spouse, let's say, you also, the beneficiary is being fingerprinted at these interviews and photographed. So be prepared for that as well. The officer will take a fingerprint of you, I believe, index fingers on both hands, and then also a photograph of you to confirm that you are the person who is applying for this benefit.
They match it up with your biometrics.
That's right.
Because when you went to get your biometrics, all your fingerprints are there in the picture. They want to match it up to make sure you are the person there and not an imposter. So that's how it is done nowadays. Now, if you need your documents to be translated, you translate it before you go. And I don't care if you think, everybody speaks Spanish. They still require that. As an example, most people do, but they're still going to require your documents to be translated. If you do not speak English, the husband or wife, spouse, the petitioner, cannot translate for his or her spouse. You need to bring another interpreter. It doesn't matter if you think that the officer speaks Spanish, as an example, you still bring another one. Who do you bring? It's got to be somebody who is, in the minds of the immigration officer, not related, not biased.
That's right.
You see,
That's right. And the person needs to be over the age of 18, and they themselves need to bring ID, and they will sign a statement saying that they will truthfully interpret what is going on at the interview.
So you need to also make sure your translator goes through your forms, because these immigration forms could be very technical, and it's not somebody who can just talk on the like an everyday speech. So go through those, make sure the interpreter can interpret, and bring the ID, and make sure that person is as far removed as possible, meaning not a relative, a friend is fine, that kind of stuff. But if you're stuck and you need to bring a relative, try to not bring an immediate, like your mother, okay, or your father, that kind of closeness. Maybe a sibling. See if you can bring a cousin, that kind of stuff.
Right. And I just want to add that, of course, this may not necessarily apply in naturalization interviews, because you do have to prove English speaking ability unless you meet certain exemptions from that, which we won't be covering here. So just FYI.
Correct.
Okay, and then the officer will just be reviewing the contents of the application, as I said before, right? Asking questions. Are you eligible for this benefit? Are you inadmissible? Do you have any issues that I need to be aware of?
And as they go through, they're going to ask to see your original birth certificate, original marriage certificate, original divorce court decree. And what I meant by original, it's got to be certified by the court. Don't bring copies of copies, because they're not going to want that. Okay?
That's right. And the same is true of any criminal documents. So if you have been convicted of a crime, you also want to get your original documents from the court to show, because that is something that they're going to ask you. And that could, let's say, you don't have certain documents, that could lead to a postponement of your interview. Also, if you haven't already provided USCIS with a sealed medical exam for adjustment, then or it's expired, then you need to bring that to your interview.
Because nowadays there's a new thing going that if your medical is over a year old, I'm sorry, you should go and get another one. I'm sorry, you have to pay for it again, because doctors are not going to do a new one, an updated one for you without cost, but it will hold it up if you don't bring one to the interview. All right?
Right.
So,
and I just want to emphasize that this process is supposed to be non-adversarial. The officer is not your enemy, and you should not be afraid of the officer. He or she is just there to ask you questions about the application and determine if you're eligible for the relief that you're seeking. So it's very important to keep that in mind when you're going there, and hopefully that will put you at ease. But you can also hire counsel to represent you. You are allowed to bring an attorney with you to the interview, and sometimes I know it costs money, but sometimes for the peace of mind it may be worth it. And especially you should consider that if you have some issues in your case. Let's say you have some immigration issues, you were caught at the border, for instance, you have deportations, or you have criminal issues. We do recommend that you take an attorney, or you hire an attorney, or at least prepare in advance of the interview with an attorney. It's very important to prepare for your interview.
That said, as non-adversarial as the interview is, they are still law enforcement people.
Right.
Just remember that, because they have the power to say yes or no based on your facts. So I always tell people, it's just like you don't go and buy the first car you see. You go and check out the cars that you buy. Well, I always recommend people that not necessary that you hire a lawyer to do everything for you, but it is always good to go and ask questions. Get a idea of what your weak points are. Just have a consultation. Mm-hmm. And that way you are much more prepared and not shoot from the hip, because I get people tell me, I have nothing to hide, everything is real. Of course everything is real. It's not that you have anything to hide, but if you don't present it well and not prepare for it, it will hold up the approval of your case, and who wants to be held on forever in some, I call it Neverland, but somewhere that you don't even know how to ask them what's happening. You have to keep going back, which I think is really much more work than anybody wants. Right. So be prepared in different ways. Know your own story, know your history, know your case, be prepared to able to document everything in documentation about your case, and then you should be fine.
Right, and assume that immigration knows everything, right?
They do.
They do. And a lot of
they've
times
been used to in the old days.
Yeah.
In really old days. Now computers talk to everybody, and we know that.
And a lot of times, I have consulted with people who say that they have no arrest, never been arrested, and then we do background checks and an arrest appears. So, it's very important to either consult with an attorney or, do your background checks and make sure that you are, even before applying, you are eligible for the benefit, because it is very important. We don't want that you would jeopardize your situation in any way by going to an interview and having the officer either deny your application, potentially put you in removal proceedings, or maybe you're just out a lot of money.
And also, as I said before, each officer can do things differently. They run the show.
Right.
Some of them separate on a marriage case, separate the husband and wife immediately, meaning that they don't even care whether you're going to present a good case or not.
Right, and I have found that happens, and maybe you can talk more about this, on marriage-based adjustment applications where there's a huge age discrepancy or some other indicia of fraud, right, that they've seen in the application. So let's say you and I were to get married, we might be separated, Ellen.
Yeah, we might be. But actually not, Giselle. I mean, some officers just automatically does it, regardless.
Yeah.
So, I mean.
So it depends on the officer.
Really
it depends on the officer. But maybe you need to be prepared as if you were going to be separated from your spouse, right? Which means over-prepare. And I've seen questions where who sleeps on which side of the bed, or how many bedrooms.
All those are normal. I can give you one example.
Okay.
They ask you when is the first date. I mean, great marriage, there's no problem. They ask when's your first date. Between the spouses, they have different ideas when the first date was. So if you really even ask your spouse today, you say, when did we first date? We say, oh no, I just met you. That wasn't a date. And he would say, well, that certainly was a date. So these are little things that you think are not a problem, but when you come down to it, you're going to give different dates because that's
right.
what you consider.
And what the officer does when they separate you is they ask you and your spouse the exact same questions. And if you give different answers, then they find the discrepancy and they might not think it's a valid marriage. So that's why it is very important to prepare for these things.
Yes.
And they won't often, or sometimes they might not give you the opportunity to explain the difference. So you have no idea what your spouse has said.
They actually have very little time allotted for you. So it's almost like you have to show and tell in less than the time that you are ready for. So in essence, we cannot overemphasize preparation.
That's right.
So now you're at the end of the interview. Some officers will tell you, I have to take this case under submission. Is that bad? Not always. Some will say, hey, you need a new medical because you didn't bring an updated one, did this and that. If there are things that they need, you will leave with a list of what we call requests for more evidence that you need to be able to send back to them. Before you leave, even though it is on that piece of paper, make sure you understand how you are going to send this thing back to the immigration office, because you cannot just say, oh, I'll bring it back tomorrow, because they're not going to take it. So understand that before you leave so you know exactly what your next steps are. Also understand how long they have given you to get those documents so that you don't miss the deadline. Then they are then going to deny your case.
Right.
So, but when you meet with a situation where the officer says, I'm good, I'm happy, but I can't make a decision right now. I don't want anything else. You will get it by mail. Is that also bad? Well, psychologically it is, but in reality, it's quite common. The officer have to do a lot of busy work on the computer before they can push that button, say make card. And so they want to make sure everything's lined up in the computer before they make it. So you basically is at their mercy in a sense. You go home. Will it come quick? Hopefully. A couple months is normal. I know this. Why does it take a couple months? But that's how long they can take. And what happens during that time is they say we'll let you know by mail. They actually do not. It's not like they send you something. They say you're approved. When you find out you've been approved, it's either online, and you should be able to get the online to see the latest, or you just simply get the green card in the mail and you go, oh, here it is, So that's how it happens.
Right. So don't necessarily see, request for evidence as a bad thing, or a non-approval, you didn't get approved that same day, as a bad thing. They just have to do their checks sometimes. I mean, I know I went to an interview recently where the officer right off the bat said, I will not be able to approve your case today because I don't have her other file with me here. So there could be any number of reasons that could lead to you not being approved the same day, even if your case is a clean case, slam dunk case. And another thing I do want to emphasize is to be honest in your responses, answer truthfully. Would you agree? I mean, the worst thing you can do is go in there and lie.
You have to answer truthfully, because otherwise there'll be holes in it. But what I do caution people is to just listen to the question and answer the question, and don't go off on all kinds of tangents and talk about everything under the sun. Number one, they won't appreciate it because you're wasting their time. Number two, I also think that you're opening yourself up for a lot more other questioning.
That's right.
That the officer may not even have thought about.
Right.
So these are the things that you should sort of keep in mind. I know it's a lot. So if you start early and not the night before, then, and I also suggest that you start early with the getting all the documents together and not the night before, because you never know, that might lead to your divorce the next day.
Right. So yeah, the most important thing really, be prepared, be on time. Yes. If you feel uncomfortable, or if there are any issues in your case, please at least consult with an attorney. Yes. We are here, yes. We're available.
Yes, and so I think this is very general. We haven't gone into all the stuff that sometimes does happen, but we want to give you a heads up, and hopefully that what we did today has been helpful to all of you who have questions about the interview itself.
That's okay. Right. So thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you again soon.